Misfit managed, Empty Fortresses, Social Robots, and Irony in Autism Research. Rua M. Williams, Williams 2020 at ufl.edu. For Twitter, go to @STARFEURI. I'm a PhD student in the Human Experience Research Lab at the University of Florida. Our collective fascination with constructing life in our image covers the expanse from agriculture, animal husbandry, synthetic agents, and psychosocial intervention. In this presentation, I explore the discourses of imitation, repetition, and correction that drive robotic development for intervention on developmental disability. The robot and the autistic child are both described as inherently empty, without intention, uncanny in motion and affect. The robot is presumed to be programmable towards humanness by human designers. The autistic is presumed to be shapeable towards humanness by robot-assisted therapeutic intervention. To explore this space of humanness in relation to autistics and robots, I return to the original text of Bettelheim's The Empty Fortress to restore nuance to his theorizations that allows us to trace how his legacy still shapes our scientific inquiry and our cultural constructions even now that his work has been discredited. Rather than believing in an innate and inborn autistic emptiness, what Bettelheim actually posited was that autistic withdrawal was the result of a dyadic loop. A moment of unusual or seemingly absent affective relation from the child would cause the parent or caregiver to withdraw, show ambivalence or resentment. This would, in turn, cause the child to internalize the rejection and further withdraw. This phenomenon recurs in a vicious cycle. Consequently, the child becomes more and more withdrawn, fortifying themselves against affective contact in an effort to protect themselves from rejection, which counterproductively makes it impossible for the affective nurturance the child needs to reach them, causing their fortress to be under a sort of self-induced siege, slowly and ultimately emptying the fortress of a self in the child's misguided efforts at self-preservation. They then become entrenched in the autistic position, according to Bettelheim. Childhood autistic psychosis is thus located as discrete moments of acute misunderstanding, catalyzed by the child's own decision to withdraw as protection. What Bettelheim describes, in effect, is autism as the autistic's choice. We have paradoxically chosen withdrawal and simultaneously become non-agents in our own lives. This theorization of autism as a temporal spatial position allows Bettelheim to insist on residential treatment as the solution. The orthogenic school is then tasked with coaxing autistic children out of withdrawal. To Rosemary Garland Thompson, disability and disablement are produced through material discursive cycles of becoming bound by temporal spatial conditions of fitting and misfitting, harmony or disjunction. The misfit is a moment in space-time where a particular embodiment encounters a disjunctive relation with the socio-material environment. Bettelheim's autistic position is one produced by cycles of relational disjunction. My tongue is disjuncted. One which is resolved by agential choice to enter fitting normative relations, to emerge from withdrawal. The autistic child is one who refuses to relate, a misfit, all while being said to have no self to intend. Autistic rhetorician Melanie Yergeau takes up the paradox of autistic intention, proposing autism as a state of negotiation between rhetorical and arrhetorical worlds. Through neuroqueering relations, through our misfitting, we produce an ebb and flow between claiming and repelling rhetorical intention, a demi-rhetoricity. This negotiation ruptures power relations between the autistic and narrative interpretation. Interpretations of the autistic as mechanical have shaped descriptions of autistic speech, movement, and affect. Autistic prosody, or verbal intonation and cadence, is often classified as bizarre, unusually monotonous in pitch, rhythm, and intensity. In a study of a wearable computing device for atypical prosody intervention, autistic prosody is described as flat, robotic, or mechanic. Similarly, autistic movement has been classified as atypical in rhythm and acceleration, even jerky. In tests of autistic emotional expression, non-autistic observers have been shown to rate autistic expressions as more odd or inscrutable than other non-autistic expressions. Comparisons of the autistic to the robotic become more nefarious when the autistic is represented not only as mechanical, but as faulty in their machinery. Our understanding of the brain has become inseparable from our understanding of the computational. Cognition becomes processing, mental fatigue becomes memory load, and disability becomes bad hardware or software in need of a patch. The misfit becomes the miswired. Thus, the practice of constantly seeking and striving towards a self-improvement indistinguishable from the optimal cognito-normate becomes a cultural and medical imperative. The notion of the autistic as the miswired extends into the foundational motivations and conditions for progress in many computer research domains. They do not figure the autistic body as a site of intervention, but rather as a symbolic state that circumscribes the conditions of failure. Quote, until computers can learn the emotional significance and similarities of situations, they will be like autistics, who are also good at memorizing patterns and lists, but not good at understanding emotional significance or at responding suitably. End quote. Picard, 1996, Affective Computing, page 79. Quote, robots and other synthetic agents, example, virtual humans, are generally autistic. Out of the box, before a significant programming effort is spent, they are unable to behave correctly in social situations involving other agents, robots, or humans, and yet, in a sense, making agents or robots behave correctly towards others, whether synthetic or human, is at the core of multi-agent and multi-robot systems research. End quote. Kaminka, 2013, page 801. When computer research domains do take up the autistic body as a site of intervention, we then have an infinite cycle dependent upon the dehumanization of autistic people. Autistics are a model of how not to build machines. Machines are then a model for how the autistic can become more normal, more correct, and more human. Humans are in fact quite worried about what machine minds get up to once they have ruptured our direct programmatic control, even when that was precisely our intention for them. We believe that we bestow minds upon machines, yet we have no control over how those minds develop. Despite considerable control over their physical embodiment, we have much less understanding of their capacity for extended cognition. In his essay, What It's Like to Be a Bot, Damian Patrick Williams expands on Thomas Nagel's problem of bat embodiment and knowing. Quote, machines are developing a separate kind of interaction and interrelation with the world, which means that they will develop new and different kinds of minds to which human beings cannot have direct access. A human being will never know exactly what it's like to be a bot because we do not inhabit their modes of interaction. End quote. We cannot ever truly know the other, either as a category or as an individual. Perhaps the autistic is considered disordered precisely because they do not act on the pretense of mutual understanding. Following from Merleau-Ponty's extended mind theory, we can consider devices, bots, and other people as an extension of our cognition. Perhaps it is the autistic's inscrutable direction and discretion of extension that troubles others so much. Within the collected socially assisted robot or robot-assisted therapy literature, there were repeated references to the benefits of robot-delivered therapies to both parents and therapists. In a disturbing echo of Bettelheim's empty fortress rhetoric, multiple authors intoned the robots would not struggle to tolerate the autistic children like therapists and parents might. Quote, usually it is rather difficult for people to handle their own emotion when being around children with impaired social interaction. Parents of autistic children may feel tired, frustrated, and depressed. Such feelings could negatively affect this development in social interaction even more. End quote. Sangtari Wangchai et al., 2016, page 2. Quote, higher social function would be a major improvement for children with autism, not to mention the potential positive impact on the children's caregivers. End quote. Goodrich et al., 2011, page 143. According to the literature, the intrigue of robot intervention is primarily based on the robot's potential to relieve the pressure, workload, and distress of the autistic person's family, therapists, and broader society. In the socially assistive robot literature, the robot is figured primarily as an assistant to the therapist. Authors repeatedly assure clinicians that robots are not being designed to replace them, but instead to make their jobs easier, to relieve their cognitive workload, to make their services more consistent and reproducible, and even to ensure that they are doing their jobs well. It is here that the surveillance nature of robot-assisted intervention is made the most clear. In addition to ensuring that the patient is progressing adequately, some designs even promote tracking the therapist's behavior to improve outcomes. Some robots are designed as clinical proxies, constrained in their function by predefined actions and designed to be activated according to a prescribed set of conditions, patient actions, or remote control. Other robot proxies are directly inhabited by the therapist, presenting a shift from a Wizard of Oz to a Trojan horse-like design, where the child's presumed heightened interest and engagement with the robot is leveraged to ensure the delivery of the therapist's intended instruction. Quote, "The goals of this session include to develop a rapport with children through robots and help them learn more appropriate movements and emotions to be able to display when faced with similar situations." End quote. Bevel et al., page 422. The final role of the robot is as social mediator. This is the role that is relied upon to generalize autistic robot interactions to autistic other interactions, or, as the literature often states, moving from child-robot to child-human interaction. The mediator role is engaged when skills learned from interacting with the robot are meant to be transferred to the interactions with the therapist, often in a triadic scenario. The mediator robot also leverages the assistant surveiller role to reinforce correct and enforce appropriate social behavior. Quote, "The use of robots in physical interpersonal touch therapy is a stepping stone for autistic children to interact with humans." End quote. Lee, page 174. These roles operate in eerily similar ways to the actions of the counselors at the orthogenic school. Quote, "Our task as we see it is to create for the psychotic child a world that is totally different from the one he abandoned in despair, and moreover a world he can enter right now as he is." End quote. The drawing out of the child from their autistic position by manipulating perseverative actions and interests slowly toward the counselor's idea of recovery is based on the assumption that there is nothing about the adult that needs to change. Bettelheim might be, quote, "with the child in his private world," end quote, but the intention is never to meet them halfway and collaborate to build a better world, but to coerce them into a facsimile of normativity for the ease and comfort of others. Quote, "One cannot help another in his ascent from hell unless one has first joined him there." End quote. Similarly, the function of socially assistive robots is not to build adaptive skills or to imbue self-efficacy and embodied competence, but to shape pre-designated socially appropriate gestures and scripts for the benefit of some imagined social good. Small moments of enacted and proposed robotic autistic solidarity can point the way toward more respectful inquiry into robotic applications for autistic end users. Quote, "Child 10 performed the task but had some difficulties imitating the movement. At the end of each session with the robot, he kissed it on the head." End quote. Chevalier et al., 2017, page 183. I urge us to explore the capacity for autistic robot collective affection and care. The robots are described as capable of detecting autistic affect, quote, "in absence of other normative modes of communication," end quote, and even subsequently adjusting their actions toward the child. The autistic is shown enacting a gesture of love. Perhaps autistics and robots are ready to forge collective understanding and mutual care despite substantial embodied differences, a readiness that researchers have not extended to their objects of study. What potential futures of human-robot interactions might come from privileging the autistic and centering autistic people's desires in robot design? Perhaps by working with people who have the most need of collective care can help us design robots as companions and not as overseers or as the enslaved. Autistic children, quote, "remind us that the human body can operate without a human spirit, that body can exist without a soul," end quote, Bettelheim. Quote, "The robot has participated in 2 Skype calls during presentations regarding this study, and during one exchange, an audience member asked, 'Are you self-aware?' End quote. Villano et al., 2011. These excerpts reflect the remarkable irony of social robot research for autism intervention. We are curious about the robot's capacity to develop an unintended self-awareness while simultaneously building them to interact with and correct people we have classified as having a deficit of self. For those that advocate for autistic acceptance by asserting our personhood and distancing ourselves from the trope of the mechanical boy, I challenge us to discard this line of protestation. I am increasingly skeptical that human has any utility as a category for ethical thinking. Any category, by definition, creates members of the not category. Whoever has the power to designate the not human has the power to kill. I want no part of it. I may not know if the robot has a soul, but as someone who has been called soulless, I know it's always best to assume and respect the sanctity of other bodies, no matter how different from my own. Perhaps in giving up the human, we give up the universalizing and totalizing efforts of a colonial white supremacist logic that generates the drive and urgency to intervene on difference in the first place. It is time to turn our interventions away from bodies and towards structures of oppression. If we are to create robotic life, let us at least create it to nurture and appreciate other life, not to shape it, normalize it, or snuff it out.